of this church, okay? And I just basically, remember, we're under the assembly, and under the assembly you have the city and you have the church, okay? And we want, first of all, we won't look at the church tonight. We'll just look at the city, okay? And kind of get an idea. All right, geographically, gosh, there's so many things to look at. This is kind of a layout of the city. By the way, you can't always do this with all of them. Is that in focus, you think? Pretty much. Ain't wide enough, I don't guess, but close enough. The thing you want to remember is that with this city, it had, first of all, sea access. And that's important because, when you got access to the sea, you can export things, you can have an import of things. And basically what you have is you've got three rivers, basic river basins that went in the Aegean Sea. They're the Hermus, Castor, and the Meander, all right? And the Castor River is the main river, and they all flowed. And the interesting thing is they had built, this is a man-made canal. You see how long that is? They built a canal, and they had great big pillars and everything else. Really a fancy, fancy thing in its day, to where the ships could come in, and then they could come all the way into the city. That's what that canal did. It was really neat. I'm sure you could only get so close, to land with everything, but you could come out there, the man-made canal, you could come right on in, and that made it for a very prosperous type deal because, like I said, you could have goods coming in, you could send goods out, and that's the sea part. Not only is it a sea deal, but it has land access. There's four basic roads that went to this place, and again, I'll just give them to you. From the north, there was a main caravan, a road that came from Pergamos and Smyrna. From the northeast, it came from Sardis and Galatia and Phrygia. One from the southeast, which was a trade route from the Euphrates, going through Colossae and Laodicea, and then one came from the south through the Meander Valley and through Miletus. And so you have to keep in mind, that may not sound like much, but it's very important, because if a town's going to grow and be big stuff, there's got to be access to it. We're like Bentonville. We got a growing problem. The roads are too small. They widened this one not long ago, but it was that way back then. If you had a big prosperous city, you had to have a way to get to that city. And so you had four, not small dumpy roads, four main roads that came into this thing. And so what I'm saying is, strategically, I'm just giving you a feel for this. Strategically located. If you lived in Ephesus, it'd have been a dream city. You'd said, man, it's sort of like for... All right, historically, all right, just to give you the background again, it was, when you go back and look at historically, it basically began with the tribe of Amazons. And the Amazons were basically run by women. I thought this was really interesting. They really were. And these were tough women, man. These were vigorous, but savage kind of women. And whatever. And they believed that the mother goddess was born in Ephesus. That's what they believed. And they even had I don't know, it was like a statue or something, and they said that it fell down from heaven. And they built a temple around this idol, this goddess. And, of course, obviously it didn't come from heaven, but nobody knew where it came from. And as the story went, it just dropped out of... Zeus was usually the one they thought threw it down, but it just dropped out of heaven, and that was their, kind of their big thing. All right. It flourished, the city did, until 11th century B.C. when Androclus, the son of an Athenian king, came and conquered the city. And when they conquered the city, what they did, they took this goddess and they dedicated it to, it's Artemis in the Greek, and it's Diana in the Latin, all right? And so when you see it, sometimes you see it to Artemis, sometimes Diana, same thing. It's just one's Greek and one's Latin. And so they made a big deal about it. All right, in 356 B.C., the temple was destroyed, and it was rebuilt. Only this time it was rebuilt in an elaborate way. What I read was kings from all over the world had a part in building this temple. In fact, the temple, I don't know if you know this, but the temple of Diana is one of the 7 wonders of the world. Did you know that? Did you know what the 7 wonders of the world were? Let me give them to you. I didn't know what they were, but I kind of recognized them when I was looking at it. But here's the 7 wonders, just so you know. I didn't know anything. But anyway, Pharos' lighthouse at Alexandria in Egypt. The pyramids, of course, near Cairo, Egypt. The wall and hanging gardens at Babylon. Most people recognize that. The tomb of King, I think it's pronounced Mansolus, the Colossus at Rhodes, and the statue of Zeus on Mount Olympus. And then the last one is this temple. So it's one of the, it's one of the seven wonders of the world. Must have been really impressive. Now today, there ain't nothing there. If you went to Ephesus today, it's just a bunch of ruins. I mean, it's the harbor that went in, it's all filled in with dirt and junk like that. I'm told the temple is just, it's a breeds malaria, is what I heard. It's got mosquitoes all over the place. I mean, it's just the pits when you get right down to it. So, it kind of shows you man's got all this impressive stuff, but when time does its mark, it won't amount to diddly spit. Amen? And that's like Bentonville. Nothing in Bentonville lasts but Christians and eternity. So there's a classic case. All right, culturally, when you think of this, and again, you may say, well, it's important to go into this to get the back. These aren't hicks. These aren't rednecks. When you think, well, they're not like us, all right? They're not us boys. These guys wouldn't have, they're city folk, all right? And I don't know how else to put it. I'm a redneck, so I guess that's the way I think. But anyway, the city had about 500,000 people. And that's a lot of people. I mean, really, people poured in. And I know they had 500,000 in population, but it would swell with people because people would pour in all over the world to look at this temple of Diana, or Artemis, however way you want to do it. And it was all kinds of stuff. All right, another thing is, and I want to show you this, we think of these cities back then, I don't know, I always think of them as like being a dirt mound or something. You ever think like, I guess I'm the only one. I guess I think today's modern and back then, nothing. But there's a lot of stuff. This is kind of how the city looked. They had huge, like a gymnasium. The Temple of Artemis was here. It was beautiful. I mean, when you saw this thing, it just grabbed your attention. It was one of those things that was really wild. Had a stadium. This theater, and by the way, their theaters, I don't know how they did it, but like I was at Corinth one time, and their acoustic system's unreal. I don't know how they did it, but no PM system, obviously. No, didn't speak through this kind of jazz. It was a blessing. Oh, you could hear things echo all over the place. You know how many that seated? 25,000 people. Actually, I think that's quite a few. 25,000 people. So, when you look at the city, you can just see this is a city. It's got all the modern conveniences and all kinds of stuff going on. Another thing is, and I hope I can pronounce this right, it's Artemisian Games. They were held every year in Ephesus. And the Greek word, by the way, Artemision, is the word for May. It's our word on our calendar for May. You look at the Greek word, that's what it is. Well, every May was given once a year in honor of the god Artemis. Okay? And what they would do is it was just like the Olympic Games where everybody's wrestling and all that, doing stuff like that. Well, there was great big Olympic Games. There were theaters where they would have the Greek tragedies and everything else, big elaborate parades and stuff. I mean, it was just a big, huge, no doubt a drunken bash and everything else, but it was just I don't know why I get amazed at this. We think the stuff we do now, the Olympics and all that, was unique. It's not unique at all. This stuff's been going on for centuries. And they had all that at Ephesus. Now, economically, obviously it's a prosperous city. I mean, these guys are wealthy because you got ships coming in. They were able to export. They had all the tourist trade. But one of the things they sold was these little statues, okay? And it was a little statue of usually as a picture of the goddess Diane sitting in her temple. And people believed if they bought these things and put them in their house, it would protect them. And some people will warm around their, it's like charismatics with their hankies or something, It's one of those deals where they just had the idea if we could hang on to this thing, then this God would protect us. Then they had what's called the famous Ephesian letters. And these letters would keep sickness away from you. If your wife couldn't have a child, they could let her have a child. Business, if your business was bad, it would pick business up. So a lot of what we call superstition, probably more accurate, demonic activity going on. Another thing that made it very wealthy was it's a bank. This temple here, they had a vault like inside there, and it was the they thought these gods were real. You got to keep that in the back of your mind. So what they would do is they would put valuables in there and everything else, believing that Diana would protect their money. okay, and protect their valuables. And so, man, there was all kinds of money that poured into this town. It was very well economically. Politically, it was what we call a free city. Now, remember, in this day we're talking about, Rome was the big gun. Okay, this is the Roman world. And so Rome basically controlled everything, but Rome would have free cities. And when they had a free city, it was because that city was good to Rome. They were obedient. They never gave them any trouble. They were good citizens. They were loyal to Rome. They acknowledged Caesar as Lord, and so they would just leave them alone. And a free city basically meant that they could self-govern themselves. There'd be no garrisons of troops there and all this other stuff. And such was the city at Ephesus, okay? Another thing, morally, full of idolatry, full of immorality, full of criminals. And the reason, basically, all of it stemmed from this temple. Well, obviously, you'd have idolatries. It's idol worship, to worship in a godless temple, for one thing, and then to sell these little images of this. She looks sick as puke, by the way, but to sell, I got a picture of her. I'll show you before I'm done. Criswell said this, referring to the temple and all the stuff. He said, rising out of the plain in the brilliant colors of hues of gold and red, scarlet and blue, before our eyes would pile glittering marble. It was 420 feet long, 225 feet wide. It had columns that stood 60 feet high. There were 130 columns in rows of 2 all around the structure. Each column was a gift from a king. 37 were embellished with gold, jewels, and various carvings. We can't hardly imagine it. I was going to bring a picture. I thought, nah, picture won't do you justice. I'm telling you, I've been to the Acropolis, some of these places, man, you look, and even today in the ruins, you feel almost intimidated. I've been to Rome where they got statues all over the place, and man, they're big. And I know we don't understand that because we don't see any garbage, praise God, like that around here. But if you ever did, I'm not kidding you, it held you spellbound. You almost stand up there like this and look at it. It's so weird looking and so beautiful, really. I mean, these are some beautiful architectural things. Anyway, I'll just show you what she looks like. This is the old girl right here. She was kind of, isn't that a beaut? She was basically the sign of fertility. And these are breasts. They're sad-looking breasts, but they're women's breasts around, well, I'm just telling you, around her waist, all right? And just rows of them. I don't know how many there are, but I'm just saying. I didn't count. I knew I was going to have trouble with this bunch. Anyway, they believed if you, you guys getting me all crazy. The goddess would allow women to have children, and if a man was impotent or something, she could take care of that. And anyway, all this stuff. And they would sell these little statues like this, and they were a hot item. But as far, I mean, it's gross looking as far as it's weird looking. Amen. Well, anyway, enough of that. I'll pass this around. I don't know. Okay. Yeah, really ain't nothing to it. Okay. Another thing, while we're on the subject, there were temple prostitutes. And that sounds weird, doesn't it? Could you imagine going to church and having actual prostitutes? But that was part of the religious scene. If you went to the temple, to have sexual relationship with one of these women was a sacred thing. And it was almost the idea that these women could kind of represent Diana. And so it was like you was having a part in the worship by visiting a temple prostitute. Greek philosopher, here, he's a big, long, funny name, but he said this. He said, the morals of the temple are worse than that of animals, for even promiscuous dogs do not mutilate each other. Apparently there's a lot of mutilation going on. The inhabitants of Ephesus are fit only to be drowned. Now, another thing is, this place was a safe haven for criminals. Again, this is hard for me to understand because Rome was such a justice. You study Rome, boy, I tell you what, they did. They had a good sense of justice. But Rome never rocked the boat in certain areas. They didn't. A lot of things they did, they backed off because they didn't want to cause riots and all that. Well, the temple, if you murdered somebody and you could get to the temple of Diana, they wouldn't follow you into that temple. It was a safe haven. And so consequently, it was loaded with criminals. Because if you could get there, you murder somebody, steal something or whatever, and you could get to that temple, nobody could touch you. And so you can imagine, gosh, here's the